So, Spee's midair, dodging a massive sand fist from Sandman while making some classic quips. And then, Spidey slides under another attack as Sandman's spiked sand mace smashes into a building. So, Spider-Man flips backward over Sandman, who was really losing his cool and shouting for him to stand still. And then we see Spidey looking down at a little device he's set on the ground, thinking about how he's been waiting to test this on Sandman. So, Spidey activates the gadget, and this loud sonic wave starts rippling through the air. And then, Sandman is absolutely losing it, clutching his head as the sound frequency messes with his sand body. So, Spidey is hanging out on the side of a building, explaining the science of how sound frequencies affect sand. And then, Sandman's hands are literally vibrating and starting to break apart into loose grains. So, a close-up on Sandman's face shows him melting into a pile of sand, still threatening to come back and kick Spidey's butt. And then Spidey is crouching over a dumpster full of empty plastic bottles ready for his next move. So, in this big overview of the city, we see Spidey swinging away from some cops after telling them to put Sandman in solitary confinement bottle by bottle. And then, a zoom-in shows the bottles filled with sand, one of which has a very angry Sandman face pressed against the plastic. So, Spidey's checking a clock on a building that says 7:57 and realizes he's totally gonna be late for class. And then, we're in a classroom where this very serious-looking professor is lecturing about data analysis. So, Peter is sitting there, looking absolutely exhausted and struggling to stay awake because he's already mastered this math years ago. And then, his eyes are closed as the lecture continues, his head leaning on his hand. So, we see the back of the professor as a loud sound happens, and Peter's chair starts to give way. And then Peter is sprawled on the floor with his chair tipped over, stammering that he's fine while everyone stares. So a close-up of Peter's face as he looks up, embarrassed, just saying he tripped. And then Gwen Stacy looks back at him from her seat, smiling and asking him to promise not to tell Harry about this. So Peter and Gwen are walking down the steps outside Empire State University, having a friendly chat. And then Gwen gives him this knowing look while they talk about how she stays so chipper in boring classes. So they pass a guy sitting by a fountain while Gwen invites Peter to a beach thingy and mentions she invited MJ. And then Peter stops and looks a bit stressed, praising MJ but hesitating when Gwen asks why he's holding back. So, a close-up on Gwen's face as she listens to him, looking very attentive. And then someone calls out Mr. Parker from behind, and Peter recognizes the voice as his archenemy. So, it's actually just his German 101 instructor, Dr. Dunkel, who Peter jokingly calls Dr. Dark. And then, Dr. Dunkel confronts Peter about his peculiar ideas about German grammar while Peter tries to explain. So, the professor tells Peter he's not studying hard enough, while Peter looks a bit annoyed. And then, we get a close-up of Dunkel's eyes as he accuses Peter of partying too hard, while Peter thinks about webbing him to a jet. So, a bit further away on campus, this blonde woman named Evangeline stops a librarian named Lauren to ask for directions to a special collection. And then Lauren, the assistant librarian, is happy to help, mentioning that not many people visit in person anymore. So, the two of them walk through the library doors together, introducing themselves. And then, they enter a room filled with old bookshelves, and Lauren points out a glass display case. So, they stand over the display case, which holds a very rare 13th century book called the Proteus Maleficarum. And then, we see a split-screen reflection of their eyes in the glass, as Evangeline asks to examine the book. So, Lauren explains that the book is too fragile, and the bulletproof glass would destroy it if broken. And then, Evangeline asks if Lauren has the key, but Lauren says only the head librarian has it and he's away. So, a close-up of Evangeline's face as she looks suddenly very intense and says that's unfortunate. And then, Evangeline suddenly strikes Lauren with a swift blow, knocking her coffee cup into the air. So, she quickly moves to a door and locks it with a cold expression. And then, we see the library in shadow as a news report starts playing about a situation in New Jersey. So, Peter is in a cafeteria, eating lunch while listening to the news about terrorists seizing hostages in a high-rise. And then, he realizes he's the only one who can save them and rushes off, realizing traffic will be a nightmare. So, Spidey is actually sitting on a subway train eating a hot dog while the news reports the terrorists' demands. And then, we see the scene inside the high-rise where several armed men in balaclavas are holding terrified hostages. So, one of the terrorists is looking out the window while talking on a phone, being all dramatic about their force. And then, through the window, we see Spidey descending on a web line from above. So, Spidey smashes through the glass, kicking one of the gunmen right in the face. And then, he's a blur of motion, dodging bullets and webbing up the bad guy's weapons as he flips through the air. So, Spidey pulls two of the terrorists' heads together for a loud head crack that knocks them both out cold. And then, Spidey lands a punch on another gunman, moving too fast for them to react. So, one of the guys tries to run, but he's not going far. And then, Spidey delivers a powerful kick that sends another terrorist flying. So, he fires a web that latches onto a guy's tactical vest and yanks him backward. And then, Spidey confronts the leader, who's crouching on the floor, asking him why he's so silent now. So, Spidey is standing tall, telling the leader off for making these innocent people suffer for a stupid cause. And then, we get a close-up of Spidey's mask reflected in the leader's terrified eye as he talks about facing fear. So, Spidey is swinging away from the building, thinking about how his webbing will hold the bad guys until the police arrive. And then, we see a tiny silhouette of him swinging past a bridge against a beautiful sunset sky. So, the scene shifts to a peaceful beach at twilight, and someone asks if he really called it a beach thingy. And then, we see Peter, Gwen, MJ, and Harry all gathered around a cozy campfire on the beach, roasting hot dogs. So MJ and Peter are having a back and forth about him needing to relax and enjoy hanging out with friends. Then Harry is looking out of the water, suggesting they talk about their futures and where they'll be in 10 years. So there's a quiet wide shot of the group around the fire into the dark night sky. And then, Peter makes a bit of a morbid joke about dead seagulls from Jersey, and Gwen playfully scolds him. So Gwen starts talking about her own future, saying it's hard to look that far ahead. And then, we see a profile shot of Gwen as she admits she wants her life to mean something and doesn't think being a lawyer or cop is for her. So Harry looks down, talking about the pressure of the family business and how his dad, Norman, keeps everything secret at Oscorp. And then, a close-up of Harry as he says he rarely sees his father and doesn't want that kind of life. So, Harry asks if it's wrong to just want to be happy, and the group supports him before turning the question to MJ. And then, MJ talks about her modeling being a stepping stone to acting, while Peter listens intently. So, we see MJ and Peter in profile as she says she doesn't care about being a star, just about finding that one role that connects with someone. And then, MJ looks up at the stars, wanting to be the reason someone wakes up for the first time. So MJ trails off, feeling a bit silly, and then asks Peter to tell them what he sees in the fire. And then, Peter stares into the flames, looking very somber as the light flickers over his face. So Peter's expression becomes haunted as he stares into the fire, saying he just sees flames. And then, the flames morph into a tragic memory of Peter at a funeral home, standing by Aunt May's open casket while a funeral director offers condolences. So, we see a shot of Peter saying goodbye and thanking Aunt May for always being there. And then, the scene snaps back to the beach, and Peter's face is illuminated by the real campfire again. So, Peter looks down and says he doesn't want to talk about this anymore, ending the conversation on a heavy note. And then, we're back at the library where an older man, the head librarian, enters and calls out for Lauren. So he's shocked to see Evangeline standing there with a gun, telling him to step into the other room. And then, the scene shifts back to the group in a car, with Gwen commenting that none of them really know what they'll be doing in 10 years. So Gwen's face is shown as she shares her philosophy that life is an experience to be enjoyed in the moment, like a song. And then, MJ and Gwen start teasing each other with silly names like Asshat and Pooty Head as they drive through the city. So, a close-up of Spidey's mask as he suddenly senses something and tells them to pull over. And then Peter is getting out of the car, claiming he just wants to walk a bit to get some air. So, the car drives away, and Gwen and Harry talk about how Peter is always so distant, while Peter's shadow looms on the sidewalk. And then, back in the library, Lauren is regaining consciousness asking about a sound she heard. So Evangeline tells her it was her boss on his way out, as she holds the ancient book and her gun. And then Lauren warns her that the book is inherently evil and full of dangerous power. So Evangeline gives this creepy, shadowed smile and says that she has power too. And then Spidey is diving down towards the library skylight as a gunshot rings out inside. So we see the book on the floor with fresh blood splattered across its cover as Evangeline looks down at it. And then Evangeline is on her phone telling someone she has the book and to have the cash ready. So Spidey crashes through the skylight, asking what kind of monster would kill 2 people for a book. And then Evangeline immediately starts firing her gun at Spidey, who's a blur of red and blue as he dodges every shot. So Spidey is crouched in the library, waiting for the gun's hammer to click on an empty chamber so he can move in. And then, in a split screen, Evangeline fires again, but the bullet just grazes Spidey's shoulder. So the bullet continues on and strikes a decorative suit of armor in the library. And then the bullet ricochets off the armor and hits Evangeline right in her shoulder, making her grunt in pain. So Spidey tries to de-escalate, telling her she's bleeding and should just hand over the gun. And then, as more blood drips onto the ancient book, it starts to glow with a terrifying golden energy that's radiating outwards. So Spidey is blinded by the sudden burst of light and power coming from the book. And then we see him shielding his eyes, looking absolutely stunned. So the library is filled with thick, swirling smoke and energy, and Spidey hears these guttural, inhuman sounds. And then Spidey manages to grab the book with a web line, trying to figure out what just happened. So we see 2 horrific, clawed hands reaching out from the smoke, and a voice is sobbing about what's happened to them. And then the smoke clears and reveals Evangeline has transformed into a massive winged demon monster with glowing eyes and horns. So Spidey is trying to stay calm, telling her they can find a way to fix this, but the demon Evangeline is fixated on the book. And then she lunges at him with incredible speed, shouting for him to give the book back as they crash through the library. So Spidey is dodging her attacks, telling her he called the police and she can't fight everyone. And then the demon Evangeline is standing tall, wings spread, threatening to kill everyone he loves if she's trapped in this form. So she suddenly takes off, smashing through the roof of the building and flying into the night sky. And then Spidey is left standing in the wreckage, looking up and just saying, "Swell." So the final shot is of the demon monster soaring over the city, letting out a terrifying screech that echoes through the streets. And then the scene shifts to a sunny street corner where there's a bagel shop called Lafayette Bagels. So inside, Milt is giving his nephew Tommy a lecture about the importance of having regulars in business. And then Milt holds up a brown paper bag saying, "Not all of them want to be friends." So Tommy looks up in surprise as Milt hands the bag over the counter, but there's no one there. And then, as they walk back into the kitchen, Milt explains that for some people, their money is no good because of what they've done for him. So Spidey is sitting on a rooftop, enjoying a bagel and coffee while thinking about why someone would pay a professional to steal that dangerous book. And then we get a close-up of Spidey looking up from the book, feeling like there's some kind of conspiracy to keep it hidden. So he, looking at the book, realizes it's in German and he can't read it well enough yet, so he needs an expert. And then we see this fancy penthouse balcony with a pool and a view of the city. So this older man in a purple robe is holding a large orange cat, talking about having beluga caviar for breakfast. And then he notices a bird flying high up and asks the cat, "Mr. Big Eyes," if he sees it. So the cat is squinting and looking very unimpressed while the man guesses what kind of bird it is. And then we see a silhouette of a winged creature, definitely not a normal bird flying through the sky. So the cat suddenly looks wide-eyed and terrified. And then the cat goes into a frenzy, clawing at the man's shoulder as he shouts in surprise. So the demon monster is diving straight towards the penthouse balcony, and then she smashes through the glass sliding doors, pieces of glass flying everywhere. So the demon tackles the man to the floor, pinning him down while he grunts in terror. And then the man is shaking, asking who she is, and she reveals that she's what's left of Evangeline. So she's right in his face. her eyes glowing as she screams that the book he sent her to steal did this to her. Then she strikes him hard, sending him flying across the room and crashing into a wooden table. So she realizes she's too strong and has to wait for him to wake up, then casually suggests looking for snacks in the kitchen with the cat. And then we're back at the university, where Dr. Dunkel is walking into his empty classroom. So he's setting up his stuff when Spidey calls out howdy, while hanging upside down from a desk webbed to the ceiling. And then Dunkel is not impressed, and Spidey quips about crashing an easy class because dodgeball was full. So Spidey gets serious and shows the doctor the ancient book, saying it's a clue to a double murder on campus. And then Dr. Dunkel looks at the book and asks if it's about the librarian and her supervisor who were killed. So Dunkel admits that Lauren was a kind person and agrees to help if it means catching her killer. And then Spidey mentions he'll be back to check on the progress, and Dunkel asks how long the desk will stay on the ceiling. So we see a close-up of Dunkel's face as he calls Spidey out for using a fake, guttural voice to hide his identity. And then Spidey tries to play it off as a superhero thing for intimidation. So Dunkel explains that speech patterns are as unique as fingerprints, and Spidey realizes he needs to go. And then Spidey webs the door shut and tells Dunkel to count down from 5 before the desk falls. So Spidey swings out the window while Dunkel watches him go with a frustrated expression. And then Dunkel counts down 3, 2, 1 while standing in the middle of the room. So the desk crashes down from the ceiling right on cue. And Spidey thinks about how vocal fingerprints are just one more thing to worry about. And then we see a memorial on campus with candles, flowers, and photos of Lauren and Tom. So Peter, Gwen, MJ, and Harry are all there, and Gwen asks if there's any info on who did it. And then we get a close-up of Peter's sad face as he thinks about how he heard the first gunshot, but was too slow to save them. So Gwen suggests getting some coffee, but MJ declines, looking a bit down. And then MJ asks Peter if they can go somewhere and just talk for a minute. So they're sitting on a park bench together, and MJ talks about how hard it is to be a student on campus right now. And then MJ is looking down, talking about the look she gets and what it feels like to be ignored. So there's a close-up of Peter as he listens, looking a bit distracted. And then MJ tells him that while she loves his pride, she has her own too, and can't keep feeling this way every day. So she says she's not blind and knows what he wants but can't have without hurting others. And then some pigeons fly up into the air as she tells him he can't have a foot in 2 worlds forever. So they're holding hands on the bench, and she says if there's something special between them, they should be together. And then she tells him to look at her and touch her like he means it. So MJ is tearing up, asking him not to kiss her unless he really means it. And then we see her trembling hand as she waits for his response. So Peter gently reaches out and touches her face, looking right into her eyes. And then they share a deep, emotional kiss on the bench. So the scene shifts back to the penthouse, where Dr. Dunkel's voiceover explains the history of necromancy and ancient spells from the 13th century. And then we see the demon monster standing over the man in the purple robe who's sitting on the floor. So there's this montage of the book's history, showing Roman sightings, madness, and a 14th century scholar making 3 copies. And then, back in the present, the man is terrified and the demon explains how the book's power affected her. So we see the book with blood splattered on it, and the voiceover explains the formula for becoming a servant of an ancient race. And then the demon Evangeline is screaming at the man, asking if he can fix her. So she's frustrated because she doesn't know where the book is, but he tells her they're linked now. And then Dr. Dunkel is shown reading the book, which says she can find it by following what remains of her soul. So Spidey is hanging upside down from a tree, talking to Dr. Dunkel about whether any of this stuff is actually true. And then Dunkel says it's possible and that he found some terrible things in his research, advising Spidey to burn the book immediately. So Spidey swings away as it gets late, thanking the doctor and promising to hide the book where no one can find it. And then Dunkel watches him go, looking very worried and full of doubt. So we see the demon monster in a dark room, saying she can feel the book's presence lingering even though it's gone. And then a close-up on her face shows her trying to focus and track the book's location. So she has this intense look in her glowing eyes as she picks up a lead. And then the scene shifts to Peter and MJ walking down a city street, talking about which borough has the best pizza. So they're walking away from the camera, their shadows stretching out on the sidewalk behind them. And then we get a split screen of Peter's face and his Spidey mask as his spider sense suddenly goes off like crazy. So he shouts, "Get down," and pushes MJ out of the way as a loud screeching sound fills the air. And then the demon monster lunges down from above, grabbing Peter and pinning him to the ground. So she's over him, snarling and demanding that he give her the book. And then they're struggling on the ground, and MJ is standing nearby, looking shocked as the demon continues to scream for the book. So MJ isn't just standing there, she grabs a garden rake from a nearby shop and delivers a solid smack to the demon's head. And then the demon monster is clutching her face, snarling about MJ having claws of her own. So MJ stands her ground, holding the rake like a weapon and challenging the monster to see how she does against her. And then a glob of webbing suddenly hits right across the demon's face, making her growl in frustration. So Spidey is standing on a rooftop nearby, telling the demon she'd better run and catch up with her friend. And then Spidey leaps off the roof, thinking about how he was too late to save the others. But tonight is different. So the final panel is this epic shot of Spidey diving down onto the demon monster in midair, ready for a real showdown. To be continued. So Spider-Man is wrestling with this Bat Demon lady, and his mind is totally elsewhere, thinking about a date with MJ, and then he blasts a ton of webs right into her face, but it doesn't even slow her down. She screams that her name is Evangeline, and Spidey starts joking about trademarking it for an online store. They're way up in the air now, and she's blaming him for the whole transformation mess. But Spidey reminds her she'd be rich in the Bahamas if she hadn't killed 2 people. He's trying to talk her down, saying he wants her back to normal as much as she does, but then he tells her flat out he's not giving her the book because she's too dangerous. Evangeline gets all scary and says as long as he has the book, she can find everyone he loves. Suddenly, some shots ring out and hit her right in the wings. It's Captain Stacy. He's yelling for her to get on the ground right now. She heals up instantly though, and then she realizes she can actually feel the book's location nearby. She sees it. Peter's stuff is right there too. His clothes, his wallet, everything. She takes off like a rocket, and Peter knows he can't catch her in time. A clawed hand reaches out, almost touching the book, and then she vanishes in a burst of light. Spidey is left standing there scratching his head like, what just happened? Captain Stacy is looking around, totally baffled that Spider-Man and the monster are both gone. Down on the sidewalk, Mary Jane is holding onto Peter, who's looking pretty banged up. Stacy sees Peter is bleeding and says they need to get him to a hospital pronto. Gwen Stacy hops out of the car, and Stacy insists Peter isn't walking anywhere in that condition. Peter's nervous, biting his finger and wondering if MJ can come along. MJ plays it cool, saying she was gonna visit a friend anyway and they should just go ahead. Captain Stacy guides Peter into the car while Gwen watches. MJ and Gwen trade a look, and MJ says they'll chat later. Mary Jane starts walking away alone into the sunset. Man, she starts crying. She's really hating how this whole night turned out. She walks down the street, narrating about not knowing where Evangeline went. Meanwhile, Evangeline is in some crazy trippy dimension full of floating shapes and bright lights. This glowing blue entity starts talking to her, telling her she's finally home. It tells her to come with them, or get destroyed right where she stands. She flies toward the light, and someone says it's a lovely surprise. Back in the real world, Aunt May is bringing MJ some tea and biscuits at her house. MJ tries to say she just happened to be around, but May knows it's the middle of the night for her. May points out that Peter does the same thing when he's got something heavy on his mind. They're bonding over tea, and May jokes about her rebellious recipe using rose hips. MJ admits that when things are good with Peter, they're the best. But sometimes it's like a switch flips and he's just gone. And she doesn't know why. May tells her it's not MJ's fault, and that Peter is just a really complicated guy. May gets a really thoughtful look on her face as she starts explaining Peter's past. She talks about how Peter lost his parents when he was just a little kid, and that sense of safety was gone. She remembers Ben promising Peter they'd always be there, right before he was killed. May explains that losing everyone made Peter grow up in a very specific way. It turned him into a protector who would do anything to keep his loved ones safe. Flash over to the hospital where a doctor is stitching up Peter's back while Gwen watches. Peter looks back through the curtain and gives Gwen a little smile. Back to MJ, who is just taking all this in while holding her cup of tea. Peter is out swinging through the city again, trying to look strong. We see Evangeline again, looking like she's trapped in a kaleidoscope world. MJ asks May what she's supposed to be doing in all of this mess. May tells her to just be herself and follow her heart as long as it feels right to stay. But she also says if it ever gets too painful, she has to be strong enough to walk away. Peter's in his dorm now, and he hears a door slam as Harry calls out to him. Peter scrambles to hide his Spidey suit in a box as Harry Osborn walks in. Harry comments on the place, and Peter jokes that he hasn't changed a thing since Harry left. Harry says he might be staying over more because his dad is getting really intense lately. Harry looks totally drained, talking about his dad hiding in the basement all day. We see a vision of Norman Osborn looking super menacing in a dark lab. Harry says they had a huge fight and he stormed out, so here he is. Harry admits he stayed away because he thought things would be awkward since Gwen is dating him now. Then Harry turns the question around and asks Peter how he and Gwen are doing. Harry feels like there's a wall between him and Gwen that looks just like Peter. He's worried the awkwardness is just making everyone miserable in a big circle. Peter is freaking out internally, telling himself to say something, anything. Peter tells Harry it's not his fault, and he's not in a good place for a relationship either. Harry's looking down, thinking about just giving up on the whole dating thing. Peter just stares at him, looking pretty bummed out himself. The words "Guyvierper" are literally plastered all over the background of Peter's mind. Harry pivots and asks how Peter and MJ are actually doing. Peter's brain finally clicks, and he realizes he needs to grow up and tell the truth. He tells Harry that he really thinks he loves Mary Jane. Harry asks a pretty personal follow-up question, but Peter just gives him a flat no. They decide to just order some pizza and forget the drama for the night. Back in the void, Evangeline is arguing with the entity about refusing to have a master. The entity shows her a vision of worlds dying and demands she choose a side. Next day at Empire State University, German class is wrapping up. Peter goes up to Dr. Dunkel to ask for a few more days on his paper. Dunkel tells him he's failing the class, and this is his absolute last extension. Peter tries to make a joke about how failing would let them start all over again next year. Dunkel just stares him down and tells him to get out of his classroom. Peter walks outside, wishing he could just have one day without someone yelling at him. And then J. Jonah Jameson comes marching up to him on campus. Jonah's ranting about the journalism students he just gave a talk to. He puts his arm around Peter and says running into him is the best part of his day. But then he gets mad that everyone is talking about a winged monster, and Peter has no photos. He gets right in Peter's face, demanding to know where the photos are. Peter is leaning back, totally overwhelmed by Jonah's yelling. Peter tries to talk about his studies, but Jonah straight up tells him he doesn't care. Jonah screams that he hired Peter for his knack for finding Spider Man, and he won't be let down. He demands photos of the flying freak as soon as possible. Peter walks away through the trees, thinking his life really sucks right now. Evangeline is back in the void, now wearing some kind of robes, as the entity explains the plan. The spirit talks about how blood is the key to finishing the task. Evangeline looks worried and asks what's going to happen to the world. We see a vision of an energy beam from the sky hitting New York City. More visions show worldwide explosions and catastrophes everywhere. The entity says everyone will die except her if she cooperates. It asks if she understands the mission while she looks all ghostly and strange. The blue energy pulses as she prepares to return to Earth. Evangeline lands back in the city, standing on top of a construction site. She's looking pretty intense, ready to get this task finished. She covers her face with her hands, looking like she's really struggling with the choice. Peter is standing near the new stadium construction site, trying to focus on his plan. He's got that classic split-face look as he switches into Spider-Man mode. He looks up and sees Evangeline just sitting there on a steel beam. He quickly webs his camera to a wall to make sure he gets the shots Jonah wants, and then Spider-Man swings right into action toward her. Evangeline is just sitting there quietly, which is totally unlike her. Spidey lands and tries to bait her into a fight, calling himself her mortal enemy. She doesn't even respond, just stays hunched over with her head down. Spidey drops down to her level and asks if she's actually doing okay. 13 minutes later, they're both just sitting on the beam together talking it out. She admits she's a terrible person, and Spidey just agrees with her. She asks if there's any hope for her, but Spider-Man says that's not his call. She tries to explain that her past actions were just business to her. Spidey says he'd fight whole armies to keep his family safe, so he's not letting her destroy anything. He says they have to destroy that book, even if she stays a monster forever. Flashback to Harry packing up his room while Norman stands in the doorway looking judgmental. Harry yells that family isn't just DNA, it's about who actually loves you. Harry tells him that Peter, MJ and Gwen are his real family now. Norman just calls him a bigger fool than he already thought he was. Norman claims his friends are only around because they want access to the Osborn money. Harry gets right in his face, telling him not to even dare talk about Gwen. Harry turns away, saying Norman's relationships are the ones that are pathetic. Norman gets a dark look and says he'll destroy them all before they take Harry. And then Harry threatens to report Norman's illegal private projects to the IRS. Harry tells him one phone call and one audit will ruin him completely. Norman calls it mutually assured destruction, and Harry says he's totally fine with that. Harry walks out with his suitcase while Norman yells threats after him. The door slams shut with a massive sound that echoes through the house. Norman stands by the window watching Harry leave from above. We see the street below from Norman's perspective as a car pulls up. Gwen is right there in the passenger seat as Harry gets in. The car speeds away, leaving Norman alone in his tower. A car is driving through the city streets late at night. Spider-Man and Evangeline are back in a classroom with Dr. Dunkel and the book. Dunkel explains that the book isn't a book, but a 3D piece of a massive mechanism. He uses an iceberg analogy to show that they can't see most of the mechanism. Spidey asks if destroying it over and over just makes it bigger and harder to read. Everyone is silent for a moment, just staring at each other. Spider-Man feels the awkwardness and tells them to just keep going. Uncle explains they can't damage the Nakazas, it's mostly in another dimension. He looks really stressed out, saying he'll check with other physics staff. But suddenly the book starts glowing, and energy blasts out of it toward Evangeline. Evangeline is shocked as a pillar of blue energy shoots up into the air. The entity's will starts pouring through the book to control her. She's hit by green lightning and starts screaming in agony. Her eyes turn yellow and she looks completely possessed by the entity. She lets out a roar that shakes the whole room as she attacks Spider-Man. They crash through the classroom desks while Spidey yells for Dunkel to get the book. Dunkel dives to the book as silverware starts flying around the room. A knife and fork are launched right at the poor doctor's chest. Spider-Man tries to restrain Evangeline, telling her to fight the entity's control. A flying blade catches Spider-Man right in the side, cutting through his suit. Spidey's blood splashes right onto the cover of the ancient book. Spider-Man sees it and realizes things just went from bad to worse. A massive blue energy explosion erupts from the book as the circuit is closed. Everything is quiet outside the building for just a split second, and then a giant bolt of energy hits the roof. The door to the other world is open.